بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
Now the next thing, we'll try to understand the WLC deployments. Now once we decide that we will be going with a lightweight access point architecture or the split MAC architecture, so where we do have an access points, so we'll be using access points, and we want all these access points to be managed by centralized controller. So that's what WLC. So now this WLC is going to control and manage all the multiple access points. So also we have discussed it's going to build some CAPWAP tunnels and the messages. But now the question is, where should where I'm going to put the WLC? So where it is exactly located. Now, depending upon the location of the WLC, we have different deployment options. So if you try to see, there are four different deployment options here. Now, each deployment option vary generally depending upon how exactly or where exactly the WLC is placed. So we have something like centralized WLC or cloud-based embedded, as well as mobility express WLC approaches. So each approach, we call them as deployments. Now, depending upon which deployment we choose, based on that, probably the number of access. Now, mainly we need to understand each deployment slightly differs with each other. Now, slightly differs because each deployment is going to place the WLC in different locations. So the location is one of the factors which is going to decide which deployment we are going to use, and also the number of WLC we are going to use, because each deployment capacity varies, like how many access point it supports. Like if I'm going with centralized, it can support up to 6,000 access points. The cloud-based can go up to 3,000, again 200, 100, like that. So the number will vary. So depending upon number of access points you are going to use and which deployment model you're going to use, based on that, the factors will vary. So let's try to see one by one how these deployments of the WLC differ with each other. So we'll start with the first one, unified or centralized WLC first. Now the first one is unified or centralized WLC. The name itself says it is. Now probably in this deployment we are going to place the WLC in the centralized location. So typically this WLC is going to be a hardware device. Like here you can see it is going to be a hardware device placed at the center of your network. So center of your network means, let's say this is my network, and from this network we do have connectivity to the internet, let's say, and we want the users, the wireless users who are present here, and these users should be able to access internet. That is one way, one option. We want all the wireless users, and also we want the wireless user should also be able to connect to the remote branch office. And again, to go to the remote branch office, they will be going from this centralized location. So which means we are going to place the WLC so that all the traffic goes through the WLC, and again it's going to build those tunnels, the CAPWAP tunnels, and all the traffic is going through a centralized location. Now this is more suitable, especially when you want the wireless users should be able to access the remote data center or the internet. Like in this example, let's say this is your remote network, remote data center, or the internet, and all the traffic is going through this. And again, another advantage is it becomes easy to enforce the security policies because all the traffic goes through a centralized location. So it makes much easier for the administrator to apply the security policies as all the traffic is going through a centralized location. And again, this place is going to be a more convenient place to apply the security policies so that it can affect all the wireless users. Now again, when you talk about this deployment, a typical centralized WLC deployment can support up to maximum of 6,000 access points. And again, if your requirement is more than 6,000, probably you can go with multiple WLCs. So again, when you talk about a large enterprise network may have thousands of access points connected at the access layer. Now again, the scalability becomes more important factor, especially what this design is going to offer you compared to other deployment options which we'll be discussing. Now again, the same thing, CAFWAP tunnels will be established. So between your access point and your WLC, there will be a CAFWAP tunnels will be established. Already we discussed previously. And these tunnels are going to encapsulate the traffic inside the CAFWAP tunnel, like your 800.11 data, those messages, probably the user data traffic will be encapsulated. So this is your first option, first deployment, again, widely used for big size networks. Now the next deployment, we have something called cloud-based WLC. Now in the cloud-based WLC, we do place the WLC inside your private data center or the private cloud. So again, this WLC is going to be a virtual appliance compared to the previous one, because in the previous deployment, the centralized, we will be using a hardware appliance, but whereas here it is not a physical appliance. So this WLC is going to be a virtual appliance, the VM virtual appliance again. So this virtual, as I said, this WLC is going to be deployed in your private network or at your data center. And this deployment can support up to 3,000 access points. And again, if you want more, then you need to go and create another second virtual WLC. That is something required for this. So this is more like the previous centralized one. The only difference is we'll be using a virtualized WLC, and it is hosted in a private cloud or in general in a private network or in the data center. Now the next option, we have something like embedded WLC. Now in this deployment, we do have a WLC feature integrated inside the switches. So which means we'll be using some kind of switches. Let's say here you can see there is a specific switch model, like there is something called 3850 series switch, one of the example. Now this particular switch has embedded WLC feature, which means it is going to provide you the switching features along with the job of WLC. So that's the reason we call it as embedded WLC, because the WLC is co-located on a stack of switches, and that controller feature, the WLC feature, is embedded inside your switch hardware. Now this deployment can support up to 200 access points. So each, again, if you're going with multiple stacks, it can go up to 200, and roughly each stack of switch can support up to 50 access points. And again, this is more applicable for small campus designs or any kind of distributed branch locations where the number of access points are relatively very less. Of course, 50 to 100 access points or up to 200 it can support. And one more thing we need to know is, like, the access points no need to be directly connected to the WLC switch host. Like, let's say this is my access point, which is providing the wireless connectivity to the wireless users. Now this can be connected to some multiple switches like this before it can go and connect to the actual switch where you have a WLC feature. Means not necessarily that you must have a direct connection to that particular switch. So it can be far from that. Means normally you generally think that you must have a connectivity direct. That's really not the case. So AP do not need access point do not need to be necessarily to be connected directly to that particular switch which is going to host the WLC. And that's the reason we call this as embedded, because the WLC feature is embedded inside your switches. That's the reason we call it as embedded WLC. Now finally, we have something like Cisco Mobility Express WLC. Now in this deployment, the WLC functions reside inside the access point. So which means we do have some access point models support where it just do the same job as an access point, and also it has an inbuilt WLC functionalities. Like if you take an example from Cisco access points like 4800, 3800, or even 2800. So there are different models you will find. Now these access points have integrated with a WLC. So like both are integrated on one single device. Now again, this setup, if you're using this kind of deployment, you can go up to maximum of 100 access points, anything around 25 to 100 access points, again depending upon the models. And it is a kind of more reliable and an affordable solution, especially for the small and the medium sized networks, because technically you don't want to go with a dedicated WLC product. So in that case, you can go with this Mobility Express WLC product, where you can have inbuilt WLC features or functionalities inside the access point itself. And again, this is more suitable for small scale environments, especially for the small size to medium size branch locations. And again, this is more applicable where you don't really want to go with a dedicated WLC at all. And again, how it's going to work the same way, there's nothing different. So you do have a WLC feature inside the access point. So it's going to build the CAPWAP tunnels within the same device. And again, if you have another access points, again, it is going to set up the CAPWAP tunnels between the access point and encapsulate the traffic that is going to the core network again. So the way it works, it's going to be the same, whatever the deployment model you're using. Depending upon the size of your network, depending upon the requirements, you can choose from any one of this. So if I just quickly summarize the deployments here, like here you can see the unified is also called as center, where we place the WLC at the central location. But whereas in the cloud-based, we place in the data center, the private network. And whereas in the embedded, we do have integrated inside your switch. And again, in Mobility Express, we do have this WLC integrated inside your access point. And you can see the number of access point it supports. This is something like max number. It can vary depending upon the models. And the number of client supports. And again, typical use, where we use. So if you're going with the small branch locations, you go with the Mobility Express. And again, for small campuses, and then for private cloud and for large enterprises, we go with a unified option. So depending upon the size of the network, depending upon your requirement, you might be implementing the WLC in any one of the four models what I discussed here. And again, you can see the last one is autonomous, is like no WLC. So there is no WLC here. That's what it refers to.